Hello, popcorn junkies. How are we? We are reviewing. Yep, it's Beverly Hills Cop, the fourth episode. Well, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. Axel F being Axel Foley, the character that Eddie Murphy plays. Beverly Hills Cop, the original, came out in 1984. I have to say, we've talked about it before, talked about it with the trailer, I won't go into it too much, but we have to in a review. It was exciting. It was fresh. It was refreshing. I mean, it wasn't fresh insofar as it was kind of classic cops and robbers, action. Some of you guys reminded me, when I reacted to the trailer, actually, you reminded me that it wasn't actually a comedy. It was quite a sort of serious procedural kind of film, which had comic moments because, of course, Eddie Murphy was in it. And a lot of his kind of comic moments, he was like the black American comics equivalent to Robin Williams, where when you went to see an Eddie Murphy film or you went to see a Robin Williams film, what you were going for was you knew there would be moments in there which hadn't been scripted, that were improvised, that would have been kind of like stand-up in their sort of stand-up comedy, kind of laced into real scenes. And actually, back in the 80s, because we were quite sort of, limited in what we knew could be done, this was kind of considered quite exciting and adventurous. I mean, things like Good Morning Vietnam was really exciting. And as I said before, Trading Places had come out a few years before, and that really kind of launched Eddie Murphy into the stratosphere, who was this good-looking, cheeky, smart as hell, whip-smart, clever, and kind of, he'd break the rules. He'd be self-effacing. It was just refreshing. He was fresh. So when Beverly Hills Cop came out, the reason I'm saying all of this is I want to moderate one's judgment of Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, the new one, because I think it's easy to look back with rose-tinted glasses and go, Beverly Hills Cop, it was an absolute masterpiece. It wasn't. It was pulp, mainstream, Jerry Bruckheimer kind of entertainment, but what gave it a certain fizz was Eddie Murphy, which is why I would argue that Beverly Hills Cop 2 and Beverly Hills Cop 3 never really came close. A lot of people like Beverly Hills Cop 2, it kind of just passed me by, it was unnotable, and Beverly Hills Cop 3 was very much a kind of rinsing of the intellectual property, trying to get another film out. Now, you can't escape the fact that a fourth outing for Beverly Hills Cop is going to be about rinsing the IP or rinsing the intellectual property, taking the franchise and seeing what little more sort of juice financially we can squeeze from it. But hey, sometimes this kind of really cynical commercial exercise can deliver something that's quite fun. So this new film, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, I'm not going to go through the details of the story. It's pretty standard fare. You're looking at cops and robbers, and in this film it stars, you've got Kevin Bacon in there too. It stars not an undercover cop, it featured within the story as an undercover criminal within the police force. And Axel F kind of again has to go from Detroit down to Beverly Hills. But why does he go? He goes this time because he's gone to kind of help his daughter. His daughter is a lawyer. She's representing a guy who's from the underworld, who's accused of killing a cop. He's kind of like a bit of a hopeless kind of chap. And so basically she's got herself in trouble. And Axel F, who's still doing his shit up in Detroit, he flies down there to go and sort of try and help her out. And he reconnects with his Beverly Hills Cop buddies, because that's what you do, don't you? So the kind of the conceit or the excuse to get him back to Beverly Hills is all around his daughter. And, you could argue that the whole kind of daughter thing, played by Taylour Paige, it's a bit naff, it's a bit awkward. The great thing about Eddie Murphy as Axel F was that he was young, he was kind of whip smart, he had no responsibilities, he had nothing kind of meaning that he had to behave himself. But this film very much explores the idea of him, what is he now, 60-something? Is he in his early 60s, Eddie Murphy? So he's a father. And this is a kind of father-daughter buddy movie. That's what it becomes. But interestingly, and I do think this is interesting given Eddie Murphy's private life, it explores, and I wonder, watching this, I was wondering whether a little bit of this film, even though it's quite a crass commercial opportunity or rinsing or kind of squeezing of the last bit of lemon juice out of the Beverly Hills Cop franchise, I wondered whether some of the subjects of this film, or the script in this and the explorations that they go into, it's not deep, between him and his daughter, I wonder whether he kind of had some input as the producer, which he is, into some of those lines. I couldn't work out if he was actually in his own way potentially making amends to one of his children or some of his children in this film. Anyway, what is this? It's a romp. This is a mainstream romp. I flicked this on after the football. England had won on penalties, and I just thought, you know what? Top Gun Maverick, again, Top Gun. It wasn't particularly brilliant. I mean, for example, if I go back to the 80s, I think Top Gun versus Beverly Hills Cop, I would have much preferred Beverly Hills Cop because I preferred the comic aspect. I liked Eddie Murphy. I was an enormous Eddie Murphy fan. I haven't been a huge fan of most of his films ever since, but I was a huge fan of Beverly Hills Cop and Trading Places back in the day. Much more so than Tom Cruise and Top Gun. But when we saw Top Gun Maverick a couple of years ago, wow, it was a nostalgic trip back to the 80s. And you know what? I fancied that on a Saturday night. And I think the conditions in which you watch something sometimes are crucial. Well, not sometimes, they're always crucial. And this is very much a potential watch at home situation because this is on Netflix. So, flicked it on, started to watch it. Now, what's really interesting about it as a film, it literally, I think, carbon copies every single structural beat of the first film. Right down to, I mean, I'm not too sure my memory is that accurate, but it felt like every single one of the classic tunes from the soundtrack. And I used to have the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack on cassette, and I used to listen to it. And you had things like New Attitude by Patti LaBelle, things like Neutron Dance, doing the Neutron Dance, you know, with shots of Beverly Hills and Rodeo Drive and all that kind of malarkey. The heat is on, the heat is on, all that kind of stuff. And of course, the classic Axel F by Harold Faltermeyer. So the musical soundtrack, all the beats were hitting parallels. I was feeling the same sort. I was feeling huge reminiscences, huge kind of, oh wow, a little bit like I did with the Ghostbusters revisit. Was it Ghostbusters Afterlife? I thought that was great. And so the feel good was baked into the soundtrack. I would say, I don't know if anyone else found this whilst watching it, I found that the sound balance, the music was a bit muted. I felt it needed to be pushed a bit more, and it would have given us a bit more kind of oomph to the whole thing. But this is a film with all your classic stuff in it. You've got car chases galore. And I'm not a big fan of car chases. I'm really not, smashing up police cars and all that kind of stuff. But I have to say, watching this, I was reminded of the kind of, do you remember The Blues Brothers? That was a film around the same time as, maybe a bit earlier than Beverly Hills Cop, but directed by John Landis, who did Trading Places, Connections, where I think the Blues Brothers had the largest number of stunt cop cars destroyed in a film. I mean, if you watch the car chases and that, most of their money went on fucking smashing up cars. And it was kind of refreshing to watch a film in which lots of cars get smashed up, lots of trucks go around. There's a snow plow in Detroit. But cops, police cars are smashing into each other left, right, and centre. And it felt quite nostalgic watching cars twirl and wing mirrors come off and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that. There's a huge scene with a helicopter and all this kind of malarkey. Back in the cast, we've got Joseph Gordon-Levitt in there as Detective Bobby Abbott. He's in there. We've got Taylour Paige playing, obviously, Eddie Murphy's daughter. Judge Reinhold is in there. I thought Judge Reinhold in the trailers was Mickey Rourke. Everyone's a lot older. Everyone is, a bit bigger, or if not a bit bigger, a bit thinner, but just definitely older. So you've got Judge Reinhold in there. You've got John Ashton playing Chief Taggart. He was brilliant. He was great. Again, all the old cops, they're the two sort of erstwhile hapless kind of idiots that couldn't stake out anything. They're together, so we have them. Paul Reiser is in there. I don't know if you remember him. He's also that guy in Whiplash and other films like that. But also thrown into this film, you've got Kevin Bacon too. And Kevin Bacon, spoiler alert, everyone, spoiler alert, put your fingers in your ears. Kevin Bacon is a baddie. Now, Kevin Bacon, interestingly, he's also in another film out this week called Maxine. More on him in that review. But in this film, I thought Kevin Bacon was excellent. I thought he was the right level of smarmy, potentially believable, as in being a good cop, twisted, dark, and there were moments where he was particularly malevolent, certainly towards Taylour Paige, Axel F's daughter, as the kind of intrigue builds up and essentially, we discover that there's this kind of terrible terrible criminal racket going on within the kind of police force in Beverly Hills. And essentially Kevin Bacon is at the heart of all of that. So he becomes the kind of increasing kind of villain across the piece. But really, this is a film strung together with moments, nostalgic moments, beats, points, where, right down to, what's the name of the actor? Bronson Pinchot, who plays the incredibly camp. Do you remember, was he a sort of estate agent or designer? They even had a sequence or a scene where Eddie Murphy sort of is chatting with him, and he gets, "Get the fuck out of here," and he says something else. He says, "Get the fuck out of here," and that was one of those moments from the first film that was very funny. This film literally is a carbon copy. It lifts and it cuts and pastes in a sort of new reversioning of some of those key moments, those sort of laugh out loud moments from the first film. Now, the problem with doing that is, however you kind of cut and paste, they're not as funny as they were the first time round. It does feel like it's kind of labouring the point. And so in that sense, it kind of doesn't, nothing's ever going to have the impact of the first film, is it? But one thing I do think they managed to do in this film, which I think carries it through, is they're all kind of laughing at themselves. They're all riffing and talking about the fact that they're that much older, that they don't look well, that they're taking up retirement, that they ache, that they hurt, that they're not as good with guns and all this kind of stuff, that they need to change their diets, that they look pale. He looks like he's not, there's a lot of kind of sort of bantery kind of stuff between all of them. And then, as I also say, between Taylour Paige and Eddie Murphy, there's a lot of kind of, I would say sort of buddy movie type kind of exchanges between the two of them. She's sassy, she's cool. There's nice threaded stuff in there. Like, obviously, he was a kind of useless dad. He wasn't around. He hasn't been in touch enough and all that kind of stuff. Hasn't been in contact. But even from her memories, she does remember him, at the very least, showing her how to get out of handcuffs or do various things that would prove useful in a sort of cop situation or criminal situation where you needed to escape. And what was quite nice was the way they baked those moments where, it's like showing your kids to do all the wrong things, but they all ended up being useful in the end because actually he was a great cop. And they go to great lengths in this film for even her sort of saying, there's a moment where they have a chat whilst they're driving along and she says, Dad, the child is always the child and the parent is always the parent. And there's a lot of, I go back to this point, there's a lot of stuff in this, ironically, for an action film about making amends to your child, healing the rifts between estrangement and all this kind of stuff. At one point she says, we were estranged, and he said, what is that? Is that French? As in the word, which is quite funny. Eddie Murphy's one-liners, there's lots of them. Some of them are really funny. There are some really laugh-out-loud moments in this film. There's a particular moment where he jumps on it's not a golf buggy, but it's kind of like one of those kind of convenient buggies for kind of transport police or something like that. And he gets on, and then she jumps on the side, and she's stuck to it. And there's funny, whip-smart lines. But the weirdest thing about all of it is there's a slowness to the delivery of the lines, which can only be because of age. And you can sort of see him kind of having to, they weren't coming naturally. I think you felt the fact that so many of the quick one-liners, even though they were quick one-liners, had been scripted and maybe rehearsed and worked through and all that. And that's not to say that wasn't the case when they did the first film, but there was a feeling that they just happened. And in this film, I think if there was one thing that I was missing, it was the feeling that half of his one-liners didn't just happen. They felt a bit too kind of, measured. And did they land? And in a way, I would say that the whole film could have just been tightened up, especially as it's an action film, by a good sort of 10 minutes just to make those jokes, those lines land. But that's not to say there weren't some really crisp, really lovely moments between all the characters in this. I thought the supporting cast, the older actors, John Ashton especially and Judge Reinhold. John Ashton's in it a lot more. I thought that was neat. I quite liked all of that. Kevin Bacon, as I say, is a perfect kind of villain. It looks like they're all having fun. And there is something quite funny and yet still convincing about watching Eddie Murphy at the age of 63 running around in a varsity jacket. He's got his college jacket. It works, even though there's just a little bit of a paunch and a little bit of a pot belly, and when they all move around these kind of interiors, they're padding along quite slowly. Some quite nice dramatic moments, they look like real life stunts. They drive a truck through the front of a shop or a sort of arcade of some sort, shopping arcade or something like that. That was impressive. There's quite a neat helicopter sequence, and in fact, in the helicopter sequence where Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who's also the love interest of Taylour Paige's daughter, he's sort of like, he's been a helicopter pilot in the past, but he hasn't done it for a long time, so he's struggling with this fucking helicopter. That's quite a funny scene because there's a point where they're going to crash, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt sort of says, I can't control it, and then Eddie Murphy says, I'm going to fucking shoot you. I'm not going to die I'd rather be shot than die in a fucking helicopter. There's some funny little moments like that. One particular standout moment, I have to say, was a scene with Louis Guzman. He's brilliant. He's fantastic. But he plays the head of a kind of drug cartel. And there's a really funny moment where he's doing karaoke, and Eddie Murphy and Joseph Gordon-Levitt sort of like, they run the risk of nearly getting shot. And then they have this kind of really intense one-to-one kind of conversation with him. And it was really, I liked the counterintuitive thing where in a sense we needed to trust the kind of drug dealers and the drug cartel, or we needed to trust this guy more with his glitter and his quite camp kind of desire to sort of sing songs, this kind of gang leader. I like that. I like the inversion of the fact that we weren't, not all gangsters were the baddies. There was actually quite a funny, warm, likeable kind of gang leader in this, whereas obviously Kevin Bacon is the one who's absolutely not to like. You've got kind of shootouts in ports, that idea that bodies get chucked into the sea and all that kind of stuff. There was a very arresting moment earlier in the film when the cartel are trying to threaten Axel F's daughter right at the beginning, before he's kind of come over to kind of save her or work with her in Beverly Hills Cop, in Beverly Hills. There's a moment where the car's pushed out the back of a kind of car park and it falls all the way down. You see it falling, and then it's held on a kind of harness that kind of has her swinging. So there's some really kind of neat kind of visual effects, stunts, if you like, with cars. One thing I was pleased about was I thought from the trailer Eddie Murphy looked like he just wasn't going to want to be here for the whole fucking Enterprise, but actually he does. I just think he's older, he gets tireder, they're all slower, and I think perhaps the whole film is a bit slower because they're all a bit slower, but they kind of own it. There's even a moment in the middle of the film where I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt is kind of going through the kind of past cases of Axel F and how he's got caught up in all sorts of trouble whilst being down in Beverly Hills, and he names the years of the previous films, and there's quite a funny throwaway line where they sort of talk about the fact that the date of Beverly Hills Cop 3 is something we'd rather forget about that one, so they even throw themselves under the bus. But that kind of demands the question, does Beverly Hills Cop 4 stand up and to Beverly Hills Cop 1, and is it better than all the rest? I would argue it's not as good. You're never going to be able to outdo the first time or the first film. You just can't. But I think it's better than 2, and I don't think I saw 3, but and it clearly sounds like it's better than 3. It is a cynical attempt to make money. It's a cynical attempt to kind of squeeze a bit more and extract a bit more from the franchise. But everyone seemed to want to be here, and even though they were kind of re-hitting, literally the order of the soundtrack seemed to be the same order of the songs as they appeared on the soundtrack back in the day, 1984. And even though they were recreating those moments of kind of interaction between various characters in the film, and like right down to I think even the boot shot of Taggart getting his gun out. I think that there were so many shots that when I saw them I thought, I swear that's in the original. He didn't do that, but he did do something with his glasses which was kind of similar with his fingers up. And you know what the effect of those things is? It just makes it nostalgic. It makes it fun. What I would say though is I felt they needed to put the music up a level. I don't know if anyone, Christos, if you watch it, they just needed to turn it up a bit and get us going, because I think one of the things about the first film was it was a musical experience as much as it was a kind of new Eddie Murphy vehicle, a new comedy and a new way to do cops and robbers. There's nothing new about that now, but I think to have really got that nostalgia, I think they could have turned the volume of the music up a bit more. All of that said, I found it a perfectly distracting piece of pulp entertainment on a Saturday night. It's not art, it's not sophisticated, it's not clever, it's not original, but it's diverting and it's fun enough. And if you fancy a nostalgia trip like Top Gun Maverick, it'll deliver that, I think. So if I was to score it, it's a difficult one. I'd probably give it like 63 out of 100, because again, I was in the right frame of mind for it.